I want to pick up a few comments. Duba Fat says, if Russia is indeed so inept, then we don't need to have any worry about increasing defence spending. Thanks for setting my mind at ease. Well, the point about Russia and Russia's ineptitude is Russia is very big as well, and Putin or his associates don't give up lightly. You've got to remember Stalingrad. Sandra Healy says, Australian here. Australia stands with Ukraine. I think anybody with any sense stands with Ukraine. But if Edna Everage would be here, she'd be waving gladioli in blue and yellow, as indeed one should. But it appears we've entered an era where political discourse is dictated not by policy, strategy, the weight of international alliances, but by whether one ought to wear a suit when thanking the United States for billions of dollars in military aid. So this is the great crisis of our times. Never mind the crumbling of the global order, the looming elections in major Western democracies, or indeed the question of whether democracy itself will make it into the 2030s. No, the pressing issue here today, and championed by particular corners of the internet, is that Zelensky didn't wear a suit when visiting the White House. One must appreciate the sheer ingenuity of this line of criticism. After all, if one can't fault Ukraine for being invaded, or question whether it needs air defence systems, one can always fall back on this essential weapon in the arsenal of armchair analysts, sartorial criticism. It's worth noting, of course, that Zelensky was not the first person to enter the Oval Office under Trump in something other than a traditional politician's uniform. Just days ago, Elon Musk arrived to discuss AI policy with the President of the United States, attired, if I can borrow a phrase from the internet, like an aging vampire who'd just woken up in an unfamiliar century, or like somebody from a particularly ill-described rock band. But the controversy surrounding Zelensky's suit isn't just about dress codes. It's about gratitude, or more precisely, the perceived lack of it. Enter J.D. Vance from over there, who would have us believe that Ukraine's leader has displayed insufficient thanks to America for its support, as though diplomacy is a transaction where one must send a handwritten note, preferably with a Hallmark card and a touching sentiment inside. The idea that Ukraine's gratitude is somehow in question seems to have emerged largely because it hasn't been conveyed enough visibly online. Because Vance hasn't seen enough of it on Twitter. Vance, like some sort of gerbil who has to get a daily fix on the treadmill of Twitter. This isn't the way forward, is it? It's not the same as a real experience. Come out of your cage, Mr. Vance. Sniff the real air. As indeed Zelensky invited. Have you been to Ukraine? No, I've seen it on Twitter as you go round and round your gerbil wheel. Something Mr. Vance needs to consider before composing his next pronouncement on the war. Does he actually know anything about the thing about war in reality? No, he doesn't. And even when he was doing when he was playing at soldiers, he was in a back room as a sort of crypto journalist, not as a real soldier. And not really going out into the front line. If you want to go out into the front line as a journalist, you do real things, like people like Caelan Robertson. You go to the front line, you see the real stuff being done. You break stories, and then the BBC copy them. One wonders if, in fact, Vance has actually looked at the record. The notion that America has never before supported a war effort without demanding effusive expressions of thanks is historically illiterate. Lend-Lease during World War II didn't come through the requirement that Churchill genuflected before FDR at every public available opportunity. The Marshall Plan was not contingent on Europeans periodically reminding Washington that they were grateful, prostrating themselves in an ever increasing line of polyglot profession of faith And as for Afghanistan and Iraq, let's just say that expressions of thanks were not exactly the defining feature of those particular adventures. Perhaps we should be grateful that the debate is at least moving in the direction of style rather than substance, because if all that's required to secure American support is a three-piece suit and a graciously worded thank you note, then Ukraine is getting off lightly. It's certainly a better deal than the one received by those nations whose gratitude has historically been expressed by handing over military bases, trade concessions, and favourable economic policies. But, oh yes, wait. No, America wants those as well, and your minerals. At the heart of this issue is something far more revealing than the question of whether one should wear a tie in the Oval Office. It's about how the narrative around war, diplomacy, and global responsibility is being shaped. Not by those experiencing it, but by those watching it from afar, from Twitter, on the global wheel of a gerbil. It's far easier to pontificate about whether Zelensky is sufficiently grateful than it is to confront the uncomfortable reality that Ukraine's survival and, by extension, Europe's security depends on continued Western support. And if we're really going to judge global politics on the basis of dress codes, I'd humbly suggest that we enforce this standard across the board. If one world leader is required to dress formally in a time of war, then surely it should also apply to billionaires advising on artificial intelligence while looking as though they've just emerged from a medieval crypt. So the next time you hear someone lamenting the supposed lack of gratitude from Ukraine, do remember this: history is not written in thank you notes, nor is it dictated by whether a fleece is an appropriate colour of attire in the White House. And if J.D. Vance wishes to learn about gratitude, he might start by demonstrating some appreciation for the complexities of global politics rather than relying on social media as his primary source of strategic insight. And by the way, when it comes to suits, J.D. Vance should get a better tailor. And just in case anybody is keeping track, I am not wearing a suit today. I am wearing a dressing gown and a cardi.